I'm going to level with you here. This episode is what makes me geek out about podcasting. It's the kind of tech side of it, because this is that episode where we press record. Maybe not for the full episode that we want to make, but just to test things out, this is where we're going to hit record. I'm really looking forward to delving into this episode. So Frank, roll them titles.
Brand My Podcast. This is a show for podcasters to start your podcast with confidence and elevate your voice to give your listeners a brand they can connect with. Brand My Podcast.
G'day and welcome to Brand My Podcast. I am your host, Frank, as always here, and today, I am so pumped for this one because this is that time when you first hit record. Now, as I said in the intro, we're not looking to press record and record our first episode just yet. This is that time where we test things out, see what works for us, and get the feel for hitting record. See what that feels like, and then make that commitment into producing your first episode. What I'm going to cover here is a few different things. The first is microphones, then how you're going to record, and then a few different other tips that you might want to consider when recording your podcast. Because I want to give you the confidence to hit record when you do for your first episode, so that all of this stuff that you need to consider is easy peasy. So let's get into it. So it's time to record your podcast. How do we do it? The first thing I wanted to consider here for you and for all of us trying to start a podcast is what mic we're going to use. Because at the end of the day, a podcast is audio based. It can be video, and there is a component there that this will touch on if you want to do both video and audio. But we want to think about first what mic we're going to use. And this is the big thing about podcasting, that it's so accessible to anyone that wants to be a creator of a podcast, is that you most likely have everything you need. Because if you're listening to this, chances are you have a microphone, be it on your computer or with your phone. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to get a little bit more benefit of this because you're going to see visually the things I'm going to be holding up. But I'll make my best effort to describe what I'm talking about so that you can find these things online where necessary. And if you need a reference point, hit up the YouTube video. It's on G'day Frank if you search that, and you'll find the video there. Now, let's get into it. The first one that we can all do very easily is our phone. And I say this because there are multiple different ways that you can record using your phone. Either directly into the phone like you normally would a phone call. You could set it up on your desk and talk. But we want to make that maybe a little bit better. We could use the earphones that it comes with, as it has a mic attachment. And then we also have the opportunity to connect it with proper microphones now. You can get adapters from audio stores, audio video kind of stores. You'll know what is most suitable for where you are to find something like that. If not, eBay, Amazon, they'd have this kind of gear. A lot of the great ones are by a company named Rode, R-O-D-E. They make all kinds of microphones and make some specific stuff for podcasters as well. So using your phone, that's one option. The other is your computer mic. Now, every computer has a microphone embedded into it, just like a webcam, most likely. Let's say that that's your only option. That's what you have to work with. Great. That's all it really is necessary. So you have the option to use the internal microphone on your computer. The next step up is maybe you're using a camera microphone. So just the camera that you have, it may be let me hold up here, an old DSLR of mine. It's a Canon. You might likely have a Canon DSLR like this, or a mirrorless camera. You use the inbuilt microphone on that, or you might have a little point and shoot little thing like this. And they're perfectly fine as well. If you sit close enough to them in a quiet room, they work fine. Again, audio quality isn't going to be the best out there, but it is, doable. What you can do to up the game of your camera recording is get one of these. And I'm just putting up to the camera now. This is a shotgun mic. It's made by Rode. There are many other different brands out there that sell these kinds of things, but I found Rode, again, just a really good provider of audio equipment, very affordable as well. You can plug that into your camera. And I say that because if you're doing both audio and video, this could be a good option where you're only having to record with one mic and one camera in the one setup. And all you're having to do is strip the audio from that video recording to put up as your podcast episode. Then the video can go on something like YouTube, Instagram TV, LinkedIn, your own website, whatever. Apart from that, a lot of podcasters that you're going to see online that you may follow, the Joe Rogans out of the world out there, they're using a proper microphone, a podcaster kind of microphone, a broadcast microphone, maybe, if you will. With that type of microphone, there's two different types that you're likely going to consider here. The first is a USB mic, which is exactly what I use for my podcast at the moment. It looks like one of these. I'm going to hold up the second one that I have. It's made by a company named Blue, and it's called a Blue Yeti. Really, really affordable, and there's cheaper versions of it as well that are a bit smaller, but are really good, what you call I think it's a condenser microphone. And what that does is it really eliminates background noise because it has a thing called a gain control on the back of it. And what that does is it eliminates the sound and only picks up what it's closest to the microphone. So what you're going to probably find is talking quite a bit closer than what you normally would with something like a shotgun microphone, which picks up, something from a little bit of further of a distance. But this is really accessible because this can plug into your computer and you can use software to record your audio. Plug and play, and you can use it in Zoom calls. This is the go-to mic that I use, versatile. It's real damn simple. Then at the other end of the scale of microphones is what you'd call an XLR microphone. Now, I don't have one to show you here. I do have one on order at the moment, again, from a company named Rode. It's called the Pod Mic, but there are many different XLR microphones out there. Some made by Blue, the same company that owns and sells that Yeti that I have. And some are more kind of, you'll see them. Like Joe Rogan uses one. There's a brand called Shure, Shure, and this is like the gold standard of microphones, though it is friggin' expensive. It'd cost you in Australian dollars between $700-800. So it's a really, really expensive mic for what it is, whereas something like a Blue Yeti, you'd be paying around $150 maybe, Australian dollars that is. So there's a disparity in that, and there is an extra complexity if you do use an XLR microphone with a computer setup. You need to have a separate interface that will convert that signal into a USB input for your computer. So an XLR is what you typically find with, singers and musicians on stage. They have those types of microphones that are a specific XLR connection. Now, that might not be the best option to go with, especially if you're starting out and have never done anything like this before. It can be a bit of a head spin if you use that kind of technology for your podcast. Again, it's not necessary. If you were to use your phone, your computer, your camera, or one of those Blue Yetis, you are doing just fine. If you can hear me perfectly now, that's really all that matters. So they're the different types of microphones that you typically can use. There's probably other different ways that you could record audio, but they're the typical ones I tend to find most podcasters using. The second part of this conversation is, what do you record with, apart from the gear side of things? And that is software typically. How do you use the mic in combination with software? Now, the first is the microphone that you would have on your phone. So you can use an app on your iPhone voice memos or GarageBand if you have an iPhone. There's probably an equivalent on Android phones or an app that you could download in the Google Play Store. But they're the ones that I know that can work very effectively. Though that's best used for if you are just recording a podcast of your own voice. If you want to have a guest involved, it gets a little bit trickier using your phone. That's where you probably want to use a computer. What you can, though, before I move on to a computer, is on your phone, you can record your podcast directly to your podcast host. Now, I'm going to get into hosting a bit later in the next few episodes here of Brand My Podcast, but There is one host in particular, their name's Anchor. That's who I use to upload my podcast to. And they have an app where you can record directly to their hosting provider. So you can upload an episode, you could edit little bits here and there, add your music, all that kind of stuff. And that's all you need. You don't need a computer at all to get your podcast published. So that's a good option there if you want to keep it real low key, just your voice. Maybe you have a partner in the room and you put 2 microphones into your phone. That's achievable. It's a little tricky, but you can do it. Do some research on Google. You'll find the answers you need if you want to do that with a co-host or a guest in person. So the next option is a camera. Now I have a mirrorless Sony camera here, and I also have a Sony point and shoot here for a second angle. What I'm doing here is recording audio redundantly in addition to my Blue Yeti to have backup audio if this thing fails. So it also helps me to sync the audio with the video so that I can upload to YouTube using the audio from the mic and using the video from my 2 cameras. Now, all you're really doing there is just uploading that footage to your computer and then using your editing software to put it all together. The other one is to use a shotgun mic, like I mentioned before, attached to your camera, and you could additionally use what's called a lapel mic. You know, when you look at, you watch the news reporters and journalists, they have those little lapel mics on the breast of their shirts or collar or wherever it might be. You can use one of them as well with your camera if you have that. If you want to be a bit more remote, you can have wireless lapel mics or you can have wired ones. Again, it gets a bit techie, but if you're into this stuff, that's an alternative option. It can pick up better audio sometimes depending on your setting, and that might be something to consider. Then we get into the computer. Now, there's multiple different ways to record using whatever type of mic you want to use, as long as you can get it into the computer. There's a multitude of different ways to record. So the first is using Zoom. This is a great option if you have guests you want to bring on the show. You can record the conversation. You have a split of both your audio and their audio and the video feed if you want to layer that in too. What I would suggest there is just make sure your settings are all right to be able to split both those audios. There might be some tick boxes there you might want to consider looking at, and that's a great option. That's how I do one of my other podcasts, 2 Red Chairs. I record my guests using Zoom, and it's really easy. It takes no effort on their part to send me files. The audio quality can be a bit limited at times. You can get those little bits and pops and cracks and everything like that happen through an audio call. It's a bit hard to get past sometimes. But I've got to say there's some other apps out there that you can find, and I'll probably cover them in another day because they get a bit more technical, I guess you could say, but they do improve the audio quality to make it hassle-free for everyone involved. But that's a lesson for another day. The other one, if you want to record locally on your computer, not recording with a guest, or even recording with a guest, and this is something that I do as well, is recording on something like QuickTime. If you have a Mac computer or GarageBand, and that allows you to record directly on your computer using your mic if it's input into your computer like that, and just records a really simple audio recording of your podcast episode. Now, with QuickTime and GarageBand, obviously they are Mac products. They're something that come pre-installed with every Mac. They're very easy to use, and I typically use QuickTime as a local recording for episodes that I record with guests that are doing a Zoom recording. So my audio is schmick. The guests might not be, unless they record audio directly on their own computer as well and send that to me. I can get a better quality there. But a lot of the times, I just like to have my audio sounding, consistent across the board. And that's how I do it at the same time as recording on Zoom. Now, if you are on a PC or even on a Mac, there is another program called Audacity. That's something that's free to download and use. You can record your audio, and it's pretty straightforward. Hit record, save it, put it into your podcast editor of choice, or just upload it directly with an MP3, just as is, totally up to you, and that's it. There are some other programs that you could use if you're a bit more savvy in this space, things like Premiere Pro or Adobe Audition. If you're a bit more of a music producer or a video editor, there's some great tools if you have an Adobe Scripts subscription. or something like Logic Pro, I think it's called, that Apple sell, that's music-based programs. But yeah, between those, they're getting a bit fancier, I guess you might say, because they're the programs there where you can really edit as well as recording in the same program there. And we'll get into one day how to edit your podcast, but that's another lesson for another day. Additionally, if you're going to have an XLR microphone, same as a USB microphone, it's the same process. You could use all those same programs. There's no real difference there, but you do have some other options. One in particular that might be of note to you, and it's something that I'm waiting to get my hands on. I've ordered it. I'm just waiting for them to send it to me, is what you call a Rodecaster Pro. It's a podcast recording deck. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to show you some photos of it, and it allows you to plug your XLR microphones, up to 4 of them, directly into that deck. You can put an SD card into it or connect it directly to your computer and record from that basically monitor device, you would call it. You can program sounds and your intros and other little bits and pieces in there, and you can also bring in calls or even Zoom calls into it via your phone and Bluetooth them into the conversation, so it can all be controlled from that deck. Again, gets a bit techie, but if you're really down with this stuff and you understand it and you just love it like I do, that's something to consider. Of course, you can take that audio and then chop it up on your computer using your preferred editing software. And that's pretty much how you are going to record your podcast, using one of those methods there. I hope I didn't confuse you in that, because there are such a multitude of ways of doing something for the same outcome. But it accommodates to your budget, your technical level. And this is something to say that you can always iterate over time. You can step up that game over time. So once you get your footing of how to do all this stuff and you've got a bit of a rhythm going, you could invest in a better mic. You could look at using different tools to record your podcasts with. It's things that work for you better in your workflow, because every podcaster is different and every show is different as well. Now, one thing I will say here just about recording is file types. What you're looking to record is either a WAV file or, better yet, an MP3 file. The MP3 is going to be smaller in file size. A WAV file is a little bit more complex, but either of those formats, WAV and MP3, are what you're looking for from a recording. They're the easiest to work with, and it's what most podcast hosting providers are looking for when you upload your final file. So be it the one that you record with or after you edit, either one of those files is perfect. And then just to recap of how I do it at this moment, I'm going to update this at some stage soon once I get some different gear to try all that stuff out. But at the moment, it's using a Blue Yeti microphone, USB connection into my computer that connects with QuickTime Player. Yeah, QuickTime Player. And that's just easily recording, so just hitting start on that. And then I have a Sony a7 III camera with a 24 millimeter to 104 millimeter lens. And then I have the Sony ZV-1 camera as my little sidekick cam for the second view of things. And that's my podcast setup. There are some other things that you can use to schmick up your podcast, and I'm going to give them now in some tips. So the first one is this bad boy. You might see me holding this up. This is something that you put in front of where you're talking, and more so in front of where the mic is, and it's called a pop filter. This is just a little sheet of, I don't know if it's like nylon or something like that, that is stretched out, and it stops what you call plosives. So if I do this into the mic and go P's, Q's, R's, T's, P's, you might hear a popping sound. It may not. My mic might not have picked it up, but it's this real kind of harsh sound that blows out the audio, and it's something that we want to avoid. So there's a few ways of doing it. One, and really cheap way of doing it, is a pop filter. These things you can get on eBay for $10, $15. They have an arm that you can connect to either a boom arm with your mic or to your desk, or you can just hold it up, whatever it might be that you can do. You can get some that are integrated with the mic. You can clip onto the microphone itself, and then some microphones that have one inbuilt as well. But this brings me to the second point of, tips here is where in relation you are to your microphone. So if you're really close and up close to it like I am here, you need to be careful with those plosives of hitting the mic and saying those P's and T's. And there's probably another letter in there that I'm missing. But they're the ones that create those sounds. And even breathing with your nose and mouth can create those popping sounds. So this is my tip here, is to talk over the mic. Talk at it, but over it a slight bit. So my mic is just below my chin line, and it's pointed up at me. It's directed at my mouth, but I'm talking over it. And I find that tends to take away the plosives. As long as you have the gain at a good setting that isn't picking up too much noise of a echoey kind of reverby sound, but is still picking up your voice nicely. You may need to level up the levels of your audio when you edit your podcast, but I found this is a good alternative to having to have a pop filter in front, so that way you can see my face in this kind of recording here on YouTube. So that's my tip 2. And my third tip is headphones or earphones. These are really, really helpful when you are recording with a guest, either in person or on a Zoom call, because then you can definitely hear each other, especially if you're a little bit further away from each other when you're recording in person. These can help. But the time you want to use it most effectively is for an online call. You don't want the audio from your guest coming through your computer speakers, because that will interfere with your recording from your mic, so you can't keep them separate, and you're going to hear that kind of feedbacky kind of sound because their voice will come through your mic and then out to them, and there's just this echo chamber. That's what you call feedback. That's something we want to avoid. So if you're doing a Zoom call, have some earphones in, AirPods, Apple earphones, headphones, whatever earphones, headphones you have, doesn't matter, as long as you can hear the person at the other end of the call, plugged into your computer or even plugged into the Yeti mic something like I have. You can hear that person talking and it won't interfere with your audio recording. Then the fourth tip is audio tests, which is the purpose of this podcast episode. Is I want you to test this stuff out before hitting record to produce your first episode. The reason being is that we want to test the environment that we're in, the quality of the microphone, and if you're happy with it or not. And then if there's any kind of interference-y kind of bits. And this is something that you want to do before each and every recording. It's something I do. I check the levels and I make sure that the audio isn't fizzing or there's nothing interfering with it, because then you don't want to have to record it, especially if you've done it with a guest and you can't re-record it. You don't want to have to go into your editing software and then hear this weird sound. You're like, oh, I can't use that. That sounds awful. Like if it sounds awful to you, it's going to sound awful to your listeners. So we want to avoid that by doing those tests before, and it's going to save you a world of pain, especially before each episode. But do some tests now. Check the environment that you're in. Is it too echoey? Is it quiet enough to not pick up your family in the background, or someone cutting down a tree outside, or birds flying over? Those last two are the things that always bug me when I'm recording. It's always happening, but funnily enough today, nothing's happening. It's amazing. And when I touched on quality, the last tip there really is to not worry about the amazing level of quality. Like if you're using a phone or your Apple AirPods or something like that, or your computer's mic, it's not going to be the best in the world. But this is the real big point here, is as long as we can hear you, and we can hear you articulate your words, and you can hear your guest effectively, that's all that matters. That's a topic for the next conversation in this next episode I'm going to put out there for you to listen to. But I just want to make sure that you aren't self-conscious about how it sounds when you're starting out if you don't have the gear or the access to it. It's beside the point of podcasting. We want to make sure that you are delivering some great content first and foremost, and I want to cover that in the next podcast episode. So with that, that's the end of the episode. It's probably a little bit longer than all the other ones because I'm just, as you can tell, I really like this stuff. It's kind of my bread and butter. I love having this stuff around. It just makes me feel, happy about it. I just geek out over it, and I'm sure you can tell, but I hope that this has been a bit of a learning point for you. There's so much about this gear that you can learn more things about every day, especially if you're using a camera in the mix. And that's something I'm going to cover another day, is about recording your podcast for video, because it adds that extra complexity to things. But that's pretty much it for today. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave a review and a testimonial. I've seen a couple come in through. It's so appreciative, and it's so fun to see that feedback and those DMs that I'm getting from people that have listened and are about to listen to the next episode once I post it, say on Instagram or LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening. It's so fun to do this and engage with you and help you on that journey to starting your podcast. Again, as always, I can help you out if this is all, too hard basket. I would love to help you get this podcast of yours off the ground, or if you have an established podcast, maybe help you out with how we can move it forward. And if that's you and you're looking to get some help there, hit me up at brandmypodcast.com. Happy to help you there. You can get in contact via a little form there, or you can hit me up on Instagram at G'dayFrank. You'll see that popping up here or in the show notes. And apart from that, I will see you in the next episode. Bye.